Hey everyone, I'm going to show you how to create a motion graphics template that you can download for free below. This project-based tutorial will teach you a bunch of skills that I use when creating motion graphics templates. To learn how to use motion graphics templates, download the template below and click on the link below how to use motion graphics templates for a tutorial. To learn how to install motion graphics templates, refer to the link in the description below. To start, create a 1920 by 1080 composition at 29.97 FPS. Let's call it main comp pre. Let's make it 5 seconds long. Now let's add a text layer and name it text. Now we're going to position the anchor point of the text layer in the center of the text shape. You can manually place the anchor point in the center of the layer. However, you can see when you change the size of the text, it doesn't scale from the center. And this will throw off the template if we try to create it this way. Instead, we'll use an expression. Copy the expression in the text below or type it out and paste it in the anchor point. To open the anchor point properties, press A on the layer. Alt-click on the stopwatch and paste the expression in there. This will make sure our anchor point is in the middle of the text layer. Open the Align panel and center align it vertically and horizontally to the composition. Now I'd like to put a background on this layer. Since it will be used as an overlay on footage, we'll use the Shape Layer tool and set it to a rectangle. Let's set the fill to a solid white and we'll turn the stroke off. Make a rectangle. We'll change it later so it doesn't matter if it's the correct size right now. Let's also copy and paste the anchor point expression we used on the text layer earlier to the shape layer anchor point. Move the text layer above the shape layer. Let's align the shape layer to the center of the composition, like the text layer. Next, we'll tackle the background sizing. We're going to link the size of the rectangle with the text layer using the sourceRectAtTime method. This method links the background shape with the total size of the text layer. So even if you change the text input, and therefore the size, the background will adjust to that. It's responsive. Let's open the rectangle size property. Alt-click the stopwatch and type the following expression, which I've included in the description below called match sizing. Now as we adjust the text input, the size of the background layer changes. Let's add some additional padding to this background shape. Open the size expression we wrote earlier. Let's add 50 pixels to each side. So that would be 100 pixels total to the width and 100 pixels total to the height. Okay, that looks good. Now let's pre-comp this and call it main comp. Let's continually rasterize this comp by pressing this button so the edges remain sharp if we scale the comp up. Let's animate the comp's scale property so it looks like it's popping in with a bounce. Open the scale property with S. Keyframe the scale property at 0. Let's move 10 frames ahead and make it 110%. Then let's move another 10 frames ahead and key it at a value of 100, its final size. And let's add an ease to that scale animation. Right-click the keyframe and choose Easy Ease. Open the graph editor, right-click in the editor and choose Edit Speed Graph. And let's exaggerate that ease. Copy and paste the animation and move it to the end of the composition. Let's reverse the keyframes by right-clicking the keyframes and choosing Time Reverse Keyframes. Let's add Bounce In to the end of the layer name. We'll add some more options for animation a bit later. Now, let's make it a motion graphics template by adding the properties we want to control to the Essential Graphics panel. With the main comp open, right-click and choose Open in Essential Graphics. Let's name this MoGRT Responsive Text Overlay with Background. This is the panel where we want to throw all the properties we want to control in Premiere. So let's start with the text. Click your main comp pre-composition and choose the text layer. Reveal the source text property, and you can either right-click and choose Add to Essential Graphics, or what I like to do is simply drag and drop the property into the panel. Notice that in the Essential Graphics window, next to Primary, we have the name of the composition that will be holding the properties of our template. The properties you add don't have to be in the primary comp, but they do have to be associated with it, meaning they have to be within a composition of your primary. You can see it in the hierarchy. So just click and drag the source text property into the panel. Let's click the Edit Properties, and let's add all of these selections so we will have full control over the font and size in Premiere. Now let's tackle the color controls. Let's add a fill effect to the text layer. and we'll drag that color property into the Essential Graphics panel and name it Text Color. Now let's open the background layer fill color and drag that property into the Essential Graphics panel and name it Background Color. Let's go to our main composition and test out the properties. Okay, they are working well. Now let's add some more options for the animation. Go to the main comp and duplicate the main comp pre-layer. Delete the animation on the scale property, and let's animate the position and opacity for this option. Let's have the overlay move upwards while it fades in. Reveal the position property by clicking P while the layer is selected. Add a position keyframe at 20 frames, and let's move back to the start of the timeline and move the layer position down 20 frames by adding 100 to the Y property, so it's 640 instead of 540. Let's also add some ease to the second keyframe by selecting it, right-clicking, and selecting Easy Ease. Open the graph editor, and let's exaggerate that ease again so it's a smoother transition into its end position. Now let's add an animation to the opacity and have it fade in during the position animation. Click T to reveal the opacity property. Key it at 20 frames. Move it to the start and make it 0. Now let's make the interpolation the same as the position keyframe. Let's rename this layer so it's more descriptive. Let's add fade in and move up to the end of the layer name. Now let's make one final option where there is no animation. Let's duplicate one of the main comp pre-layers and remove any keyframed properties. Let's rename this by adding static no animation to the end of the layer name. Okay, great. Now we'll create a selector so we can give the user the ability to choose which animated version they want to use. Add a controls layer. Choose Layer, New, Null Object. Rename it Controls. Now we'll add a drop-down selector to each of the 3 layers. Let's start with the first layer. Choose from the Effect menu, Drop-Down menu. Let's rename it Animation Control. Click Edit, and let's change the names of the drop-down options to 1. Bounce, 2. Fade in and move up, and 3. Static, no animation. Now let's use an expression so the drop-down menu works on each layer. We'll control the opacity of the layers, making them either 0 or 100. Let's start with the first version, Bounce In. Press T on the layer to reveal the opacity property, and Alt-click the stopwatch to set an expression. Let's insert the expression for the first selection. As with anything in After Effects, there are a number of different ways to make this work. For our purposes in this tutorial, the expression we're using is the switch method. We're saying for the first selection in the drop-down menu, case 1, return the value of 100, or else make it 0, which will make the layer invisible. So we'll apply the same expression with a minor change to the second and third animation options. In the fade in and move up option, we'll do the same thing, but write case 2 instead of case 1 because it's the second selection option in the drop-down menu, not the first. You'll notice we already have an animation on this layer, so saying the opacity is 100 is overwriting that keyframed animation. So to retain the keyframed animation, simply type value, and it will return the keyframed values. And we'll do the same thing for option 3. In this case, because opacity is not keyframed, we do not have to worry about changing it. 100 is fine. Okay, now let's test out the drop-down menu animation selector to see how it works. Looks good. Our expressions are working. Let's drag the drop-down menu control into the Essential Graphics panel so it will show up in our template. Now let's add some global properties, like position and size. Now let's drag them both into the Essential Graphics panel. You'll notice the scale property defaults to the name scale. Let's rename this to size as it's a more descriptive name. This can make it easier to understand for a new user. Also, you'll notice the default position is 960 by 540, half of the composition size of 1920 by 1080. Although technically correct, this isn't very helpful if you have moved your element across the screen. Because of this, I like to create a null object and parent the control layer to the null object. This will make the position 00, which is a more intuitive way of knowing where your template is. Now let's organize our Essential Graphics panel with folders. Let's start with the position and size. We can name this group Global Controls. Next, we'll make a Color Controls group, Text Controls, and finally, let's leave the Animation Control dropdown outside the group for quick access. We can rearrange the order of the groups for a more useful setup. Okay, that looks good. Now let's export the template. Before we do, let's set the poster time in the Essential Graphics window. This will give the user a preview thumbnail in their library. And before we do that, let's set the template's default text, animation, and colors. Let's change the text to Responsive Text Overlay and make the font size 100 and set to all caps. You'll notice the background size has changed to accommodate the new text. This is the result of the sourceRectAtTime method we used earlier. Next, let's set the dropdown to the first choice, Bounce In. And let's change the text color to white and the background to gray, or whatever you want to set it to. Now let's set the poster time thumbnail by placing the current time indicator to somewhere in the middle of the timeline. There's one more thing we need to do before we export, and that is to create protected regions for the in and out animations, so that when we adjust the duration of the MoGRT in Premiere, our animation's timing remains the same and are not stretched or sped up. To do this, place the current time indicator at the last frame of the intro animation, so at frame 20. Press N to adjust the work area and choose Create Protected Region. Next, we'll do the same for the outro animation. Go to frame 130, that's 20 frames before the end of the composition, and press B to adjust the work area. Again, right-click and choose Create Protected Region from Work Area. Let's reset the work area. Now let's parent the 3 pre-comps to the control layer. Now let's click Export Motion Graphics Template, and you'll see an option for the destination. Here you can choose to save it locally as a MoGRT file or using Creative Cloud libraries. You'll also see an option to add keywords, which can help the user search for the template. Let's add a few keywords. Let's add Overlay, Modern, Bounce, and Smooth. Click OK, and your template will export. Here we have an error saying this default font we've chosen isn't available on Adobe. That's okay, because they can change the font in the template anyways. But it's a good idea to use Adobe fonts so users don't always get a missing error when they open the MoGRT. Let's test out our MoGRT. In the Essential Graphics panel, we can search with the keywords we just added. Drag and drop into the timeline and test it out. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments below.